Sometimes we cry for people we've never met, yet somehow always known. Elena had been visiting this forgotten grave for 20 years, drawn by dreams she couldn't explain, and a grief that felt older than her 57 years. In a misty village corner, she knelt at a crumbling headstone, clutching the silver locket her grandmother left her. The name carved in stone read, Lady Mirabelle, but Elena had no idea who this woman was or why her heart broke each time she saw it. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching her visits. Lord Aldric had been immortal for 3 centuries, hiding in shadows since the night his beloved wife died. He recognized the locket immediately. It had belonged to Mirabelle. When he finally stepped from the darkness and demanded answers, Elena looked up with eyes that held impossible familiarity. How could this simple village woman possess his dead wife's most treasured belonging? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mist swirled around Elena's worn brown cloak as she remained frozen at the grave, her weathered hands trembling around the silver locket. The voice that had emerged from the shadows carried an authority that seemed to reach into her very bones, speaking of ownership and loss in tones that suggested centuries of grief. She had never seen this man before, yet something about his presence felt achingly familiar. I asked you a question. The stranger stepped closer, and Elena could see him clearly now in the dying light. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell just past his shoulders and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of endless winters. His clothing was well made, but simple. A black coat that might have belonged to a wealthy merchant, though something about the way he carried himself suggested nobility. That locket belonged to my wife. Where did you get it? Elena's voice caught in her throat. She had been coming to this grave since she was a young woman, drawn by dreams that started when she turned 17. Dreams of a beautiful woman with dark hair who called her name in a voice like silver bells. Dreams of a love so deep it seemed to echo through time itself. But she had never told anyone about them, not even Father Benedict when she confessed her other sins. Elena struggled to stand, her knees stiff from kneeling on the damp earth. My grandmother gave it to me. She said it was a family heirloom, that it had been passed down through our line for generations. The stranger's eyes narrowed, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Your grandmother, what was her name? Catherine Aldric. She died when I was 12, but before she passed, she pressed this into my hands and told me to keep it safe. She said I would understand its importance one day. Elena's fingers tightened around the locket. She never told me what it meant, only that I should follow my heart when the time came. Something flickered across the stranger's features, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. He took another step closer, and Elena caught a scent that reminded her of winter nights and ancient libraries. Catherine Aldric, he repeated slowly. I knew a Catherine once. She was a servant in my household, a young woman with kind eyes who helped tend to my wife during her final illness. Elena's heart began to pound. Your wife? But this grave is centuries old. The dates on the stone are accurate. His voice held a weight that spoke of a truth too strange for most people to accept. Lady Mirabelle died in 1647. I am Lord Aldric Ravencroft, and I have been searching for answers ever since. The world seemed to tilt around Elena. She had lived in that village her entire life, working as a seamstress in the shop her father had left her. She knew every family, every story, every bit of local history. There were tales of the old manor house at the edge of the forest, stories whispered about a nobleman who had vanished after his wife's mysterious death. But those were just village legends, weren't they? "That's impossible," she whispered. "You can't be more than 40 years old." Aldric's smile held no warmth. "I stopped aging the night my beloved died, the night I made a choice that damned me to walk this earth until I could find a way to be reunited with her soul." Elena's practical mind rebelled against his words, but her heart recognized something in his voice that resonated with her deepest dreams. She had spent 40 years living a quiet life in the village of Millbrook, caring for her ailing mother, sewing dresses for weddings and christenings, attending Sunday services at the little stone church. She had been married once, briefly, to Thomas the baker's son. But he had died of fever before their first anniversary, and she had never found anyone else who stirred her heart enough to consider remarriage. Her mother often worried about Elena's solitude, suggesting she was being too particular in her standards. But how could Elena explain that every man she met felt wrong somehow, as if she was waiting for someone who might never come? How could she describe the dreams that left her weeping in the morning, mourning for a love she had never experienced? "You're frightening me," Elena said, though even as she spoke the words, she realized they weren't entirely true. There was fear, yes, but also a strange sense of recognition, as if a puzzle piece she had been carrying her whole life was finally finding its place. "I don't wish to frighten you," Aldric replied, his voice gentling slightly, "but I need to understand how you came to possess something that belonged to my wife. That locket contains a miniature portrait of Mirabelle painted on our wedding day. She treasured it above all her other jewelry." Elena looked down at the locket she had worn, against her heart, for 45 years. She had always wondered why it felt so precious to her, why she could never bring herself to open it, despite her curiosity. Her grandmother had warned her that some things were meant to remain sealed until the proper time. "I've never opened it," she admitted. "Something always stopped me." "May I?" Aldric extended his hand, and Elena found herself hesitating. The locket felt like part of her somehow, as essential as breathing. But the pain in this stranger's eyes called to something deep within her soul. With trembling fingers, she lifted the chain over her head and placed the locket in his palm. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded into sensation. Images flashed through Elena's mind, a great house filled with warmth and laughter, hands entwined in a garden full of roses, a woman's voice singing lullabies in a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood. Aldric gasped and nearly dropped the locket, his pale skin becoming even more ashen. "Impossible," he breathed. "You feel just like—" The sound of church bells ringing the evening hour broke the spell between them. Elena blinked, finding herself standing closer to this strange man than she remembered moving. The practical part of her mind reasserted itself, reminding her that she was alone in a cemetery with someone who claimed to be centuries old. "I should go," she said, reaching for the locket. "My mother will be worried." Aldric's fingers closed around the silver chain, not refusing to return it, but not immediately handing it back either. "Your mother, she is elderly?" 78 and frail," Elena replied. "She's been bedridden for the past year. I care for her alone." "You're a good daughter," Aldric said, and something in his tone suggested he understood the weight of duty and sacrifice. "But before you go, would you allow me to show you something? I promise no harm will come to you." Elena's rational mind screamed at her to refuse, to take her locket and hurry home to the safety of her small cottage. but her heart whispered differently. She had spent decades wondering why she felt so drawn to this forgotten grave, why her dreams were filled with faces she didn't recognize, and a love that seemed more real than her waking life. "What do you want to show me?" she asked. Aldric carefully opened the locket, revealing a tiny portrait painted in exquisite detail. The woman depicted had dark hair arranged in elaborate braids, kind eyes the color of amber, and a gentle smile that seemed to reach across the centuries. Elena stared at the miniature, her breath catching in her throat. The face looking back at her was her own. Not exactly. The woman in the portrait was younger, her skin unmarked by years of labor and worry. Her hair was longer, her dress far more elaborate than anything Elena had ever owned. But the bone structure, the shape of the eyes, the curve of the lips, they were unmistakably similar. "This is why I've been watching you," Aldric said quietly. "For 20 years, I've seen you come here to mourn my wife's grave. At first, I thought you might be a descendant, someone who had inherited a family duty to tend her resting place. But as the years passed, and I observed you more closely, I began to notice things that defied explanation." Elena couldn't tear her eyes away from the portrait. "We look alike. That's all. You weep for her, as if you knew her personally. You speak to her grave in the same tone of voice she used when she was troubled. You even arrange the wildflowers the same way she did in our garden." Aldric's voice grew soft with memory. "And now I discover you carry her most precious possession, given to you by a woman who once served in my household." The church bells had stopped ringing, and the cemetery had grown quiet except for the whisper of wind through the ancient yew trees. Elena felt as if she stood at the edge of a precipice, knowing that whatever came next would change everything about the life she had built. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "I'm suggesting that souls don't simply disappear when the body dies," Aldric replied. "I'm suggesting that love strong enough can transcend death itself, finding ways to return to what it has lost." Elena's hand went to her throat, feeling naked without the familiar weight of the locket. "Reincarnation? That's not. The church teaches that souls go to heaven or—" "The church teaches many things," Aldric interrupted gently. "But there are older truths, older magics, that existed long before Christianity came to these lands. My wife believed in them. In her final moments, she spoke of finding a way back to me, no matter how long it might take." The practical Elena wanted to laugh at such foolishness, but the dreaming Elena, the one who had spent 40 years feeling incomplete, recognized the truth in his words like a key turning in a long-locked door. "I need time to think," she said finally. Aldric nodded and held out the locket. When she took it, their fingers brushed again, and Elena felt that strange surge of recognition, as if her soul was greeting an old friend. "I'll be here tomorrow night if you wish to speak again. There's much more to tell you, Elena Aldridge." She had not told him her surname, yet he spoke it as naturally as if they had known each other for years. Elena clutched the locket to her chest and hurried away through the gathering dusk, her mind spinning with impossible possibilities. Behind her, Lord Aldric Ravencroft stood alone beside his wife's grave, watching until Eleanor's slight figure disappeared into the mist. For the first time in 3 centuries, he allowed himself to hope that his eternal vigil might finally be nearing its end. The village of Millbrook settled into evening quiet around them both, unaware that ancient magic had begun to stir in their midst, carrying with it the promise of love that even death could not destroy. Elena barely slept that night. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to her mother's labored breathing from the next room, and turning the locket over and over in her hands. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the portrait, that face so like her own, yet somehow more refined, more complete. By dawn, she had made her decision. She would return to the cemetery. Her mother, Margaret, was awake when Elena brought her morning porridge, her rheumy eyes sharper than they had been in months. "You look troubled, child," Margaret said, accepting the bowl with trembling hands. "Did you sleep poorly?" "I met someone yesterday," Elena said carefully. "At the cemetery." Margaret's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "What sort of someone?" "A man who claims to have known Grandmother Catherine. He said she once worked in his household." Elena studied her mother's face, looking for signs of recognition. "Mother, did Grandmother ever mention working for a noble family? Someone named Ravencroft?" The porridge bowl slipped from Margaret's fingers, clattering against the wooden floor. Elena rushed to clean up the mess, but her mother caught her wrist with surprising strength. "You need to stay away from the old cemetery," Margaret said urgently. "I should have forbidden it years ago, but I hoped the pull would fade as you aged." Elena stared at her mother. "What pull? What are you talking about?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Your grandmother made me promise never to tell you. She said you would need to discover the truth yourself when the time was right. But I'm afraid, Elena. I'm afraid of what might happen if you—" Before Margaret could finish her sentence, she collapsed back against her pillows, her face grey with exhaustion. Elena felt for her pulse and found it rapid and thready. "Mother, I'm sending for Dr. Whitmore." "No doctors," Margaret whispered. "Go to Father Benedict. Tell him the time has come. He'll understand." Elena had never seen her mother so agitated. She tucked the blankets around Margaret's frail form and hurried to the village church, her mind racing with questions. St. Mary's stood at the heart of Millbrook, its Norman stones weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Father Benedict was tending the altar candles when Elena arrived, his movements precise despite his 70 years. "Elena," he greeted her with surprise. "It's early for you to be here." "Father, my mother is ill. She asked me to come to you specifically. She said to tell you the time has come and that you would understand." Father Benedict's hands stilled on the candle he was lighting. Slowly he turned to face her, his expression grave. "Show me your grandmother's locket." Elena's heart skipped. "How did you—" "Show me, child." With trembling fingers, Elena lifted the chain from beneath her dress. Father Benedict studied the silver locket with the intensity of a scholar, examining an ancient text. "Have you opened it yet?" "Last night. There's a portrait inside. Of Lady Mirabelle Ravencroft." Father Benedict sank into the front pew, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "I've been dreading this day for decades." Elena sat beside him, her legs unsteady. "You know about Lord Aldric." "I know more than I wish I did." Father Benedict rubbed his temples. "Your grandmother came to me before you were born, carrying that locket and a terrible burden of knowledge. She had served in Ravencroft Manor during the final months of Lady Mirabelle's life, and she witnessed things that challenged everything she believed about the nature of souls." "What kind of things?" Father Benedict rose and walked to a small alcove behind the altar. He pressed something against the stone wall, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing a narrow space containing several ancient books and scrolls. "Forgive me, Elena, but there are truths older than our Christian faith. Truths that the Church has chosen to neither acknowledge nor deny." He withdrew a leather-bound volume and brought it back to the pew. "This grimoire has been in our possession for 4 centuries. It speaks of soul bonds that transcend death, of loves so powerful they can defeat the grave itself. Elena stared at the book in Father Benedict's hands. The leather was dark with age, and strange symbols were carved into its cover. "You're a priest. How can you believe in such things?" "I believe in love," Father Benedict replied simply, "and I have seen too much in my years tending this parish to dismiss anything as impossible." He opened the grimoire carefully, revealing pages covered in elegant script and detailed illustrations. "Your grandmother brought this to me after Lady Mirabelle's death, along with evidence that Lord Aldric had changed. Changed how? He became something beyond human understanding. The grief of losing his wife drove him to make a bargain with forces I dare not name. He gained immortality, but at a terrible cost. He was bound to walk the earth until he could be reunited with Mirabelle's soul." Elena's breath caught. "And you think I think your grandmother recognized something in your eyes the day you were born. Something that reminded her of the lady she had served. When you began having dreams as a child, when you started visiting that grave without any memory of being told its location." Father Benedict closed the grimoire and looked at her with compassion. "Your soul remembers what your mind has forgotten." The church around them seemed to fade as Elena absorbed his words. Everything she had dismissed as fancy or coincidence suddenly aligned into a pattern too clear to ignore. The dreams, the inexplicable grief, the way the locket had always felt like part of her. "But if this is true," she said slowly, "if I really am Mirabelle reborn, then why can't I remember clearly? Why do I only catch glimpses in dreams?" Father Benedict's expression grew troubled. "Because something has been blocking your memories. Something your grandmother put in place to protect you until you were strong enough to face the truth." He reached into the grimoire's pages and withdrew a small cloth bundle. Inside was a silver medallion bearing the sign of the cross, intertwined with older symbols Elena didn't recognize. "She sewed this into your baby clothes and made me promise to ensure you always wore it. It's been protecting you from supernatural influence, including the full force of your past life memories." Elena felt a chill as she recognized the medallion. Her mother had given it to her when she turned 16, claiming it was a family heirloom that would keep her safe. She had worn it faithfully ever since, never thinking to question its presence. "You're saying this has been suppressing who I really am." "It's been keeping you safe," Father Benedict corrected gently. "But your grandmother always knew this day would come. She left instructions." The church doors burst open with a crash that echoed through the stone nave. Lord Aldric strode in, his dark coat billowing behind him, his pale features set in lines of urgency. "Father Benedict," he said, his voice carrying an authority that made the elderly priest straighten. "I can sense them approaching. The council has discovered Elena's presence." Elena stood, her heart pounding. "What council?" Aldric's eyes met hers, and she saw fear there. Not for himself, but for her. "The vampire council that rules my kind. For centuries, they've forbidden any attempt to reunite with lost mortal loves. They consider such bonds a weakness that threatens our nature." Father Benedict clutched the grimoire tighter. "How long do we have?" "Minutes, perhaps less. They travel by shadow when they hunt." Aldric moved closer to Elena, and she caught that winter scent again, now tinged with something that spoke of supernatural power barely contained. "Elena, I need you to know the truth quickly. You are Mirabelle's soul, reborn into a new life. But the council will try to destroy you before you can remember who you were." Elena's world tilted again, but this time she didn't resist the sensation. Instead, she reached for the medallion at her throat. If I remove this, will I remember? It will begin the process, Father Benedict warned. But once started, there's no turning back. You'll be fully vulnerable to supernatural forces, including Lord Aldric's influence. Elena looked between the priest and the immortal nobleman, two impossible figures offering her an even more impossible choice. Outside the church, she could hear her mother calling her name, voice weak with illness and fear. If I don't remember, if I don't become who I was meant to be, what happens to everyone I care about? Aldric's expression grew grim. The council doesn't leave witnesses. Your mother, everyone in this village, they'll all be considered, contaminated by contact with supernatural truth. Elena's hand closed around the medallion. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. To protect the people she loved, she would have to risk becoming someone entirely new. With a sharp tug, she broke the chain and let the medallion fall to the stone floor. The effect was immediate. Memories crashed into her consciousness like a dam bursting. A lifetime of love and laughter in a great house, walks through rose gardens with a man whose touch sent fire through her veins, whispered promises under starlit skies. She remembered choosing to return to him across the centuries, remembered the magic that had made it possible. She remembered dying in his arms and promising to find her way back. Elena gasped, her vision blurring as past and present collided in her mind. Strong arms caught her as she swayed, and she looked up into eyes that had haunted her dreams for 40 years. "Mirabelle?" Aldric whispered, and in his voice she heard centuries of longing finally answered. But there was no time for reunion. Outside the church, shadows gathered with malevolent purpose, and the real battle for their love was about to begin. The memories came in waves, each one more vivid than the last. Mirabelle, found herself caught between two lifetimes, seeing the church through eyes that remembered both her recent life as a village seamstress and her distant past as a nobleman's wife. The stone walls seemed to shimmer, and for a moment she could see the church as it had been 3 centuries ago, smaller and simpler, when she had knelt here as a young bride, praying for children who would never come. "Breathe slowly," Aldric murmured, his hands steady on her shoulders. "Don't try to hold on to everything at once. Let the memories settle naturally." Father Benedict had retrieved another book from his hidden alcove, this one bound in deep blue leather with silver clasps. "This belonged to Lady Mirabelle herself," he said, approaching them carefully. "Your grandmother brought it to me along with the locket. She said you would need it when the time came." Elena's hands trembled as she accepted the diary. The moment her fingers touched the leather, words began flowing through her mind. Not in English, but in the French court language she had learned as a young noblewoman. Impossibly, she could read every graceful line as clearly as if she had written it yesterday. "Mon cher journal," she whispered, reading the first entry aloud. "Today I marry the most wonderful man in all of England. Aldric's eyes hold such kindness, and when he looks at me, I feel as though I have finally found the other half of my soul." Aldric's breath caught. "You remember writing that?" Images flashed through Elena's mind, sitting at an ornate writing desk by a tall window, quill in hand, watching Aldric train his horses in the courtyard below. She remembered the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the careful way he gentled the most spirited stallions, the patience in his voice when he spoke to his tenants about their troubles. "I remember loving you," she said softly. "I remember feeling complete for the first time in my life." But even as the beautiful memories surfaced, darker ones followed. The diary's later entries spoke of illness, of months spent bedridden while strange fevers burned through her body. She remembered Aldric's desperate attempts to find healers, his refusal to leave her side, even as the mysterious sickness consumed her strength. "The wasting disease," Father Benedict said quietly, reading over her shoulder. No one understood what caused it. The physicians were baffled. Elena turned the pages, her heart breaking as she read her own words describing Aldric's anguish. In the final entries, her handwriting grew shaky, but her love remained constant. "If there is any magic in this world, any power that can transcend death itself, I will find a way back to him. I will not let our love end with my last breath. Somehow, some way, I will return." The church door creaked, and Elena's mother appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but with determination. Margaret's eyes were bright with fever, but her gaze was fixed on the little group gathered around the altar. "Mother, you shouldn't be out of bed." "The council approaches," Margaret interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "I can feel them in the wind." Aldric spun toward her, his supernatural senses confirming what Margaret had somehow detected. "How can she—" "Because she's not entirely human," Father Benedict said grimly. "None of Elena's bloodline has been, not since Catherine Aldridge made her own bargain to protect her descendant." Elena stared at her mother in shock. What kind of bargain? Margaret moved closer, her steps steadier now as if some hidden strength was awakening within her. "My grandmother loved Lady Mirabelle like her own daughter. When she saw you reborn, she knew the Vampire Council would eventually sense your presence. So she sought out the old magic, the same forces that allowed souls to return across lifetimes. She became a guardian," Father Benedict explained, "a protector blessed with just enough supernatural awareness to shield your family line from detection. But the magic came with a cost. Each generation would grow weaker until the protection was no longer needed." Elena felt tears sting her eyes as she understood. "Your illness, it's not natural aging. You're dying because you've been protecting me." "I've been living to protect you," Margaret corrected gently. "And now that you've awakened to your true self, my purpose is fulfilled." Outside the church, the wind began to howl with unnatural fury. Through the stained glass windows, Elena could see darkness gathering despite the early morning hour. Shadows moved with purpose, reaching toward the church like grasping fingers. "They're here," Aldric said, moving to place, himself between Elena and the doors. "The council's hunters." Elena clutched the diary tighter, feeling more memories surface as her fear spiked. She remembered other moments of danger in her past life, bandits on the roads, political tensions that threatened Aldric's position, the constant awareness that their happiness existed in a world that could be cruel and unpredictable. But she also remembered being stronger than she appeared. As Mirabelle, she had possessed an inner steel that had helped Aldric navigate court politics and manage their vast estates. She had been his equal in all things, not merely an ornament on his arm. "I won't hide from them," she said, rising from the pew with new resolve. "If they want to destroy me, they'll have to face me directly." "Elena," Aldric began, but she cut him off. "Mirabelle," she corrected. "My name is Mirabelle, and I am the wife of Lord Aldric Ravencroft. I may have been born into this humble life, but I remember who I truly am." Margaret smiled through her tears. "There's my brave girl. You always were too stubborn for your own good." The shadows outside pressed closer to the church walls, and Elena could hear whispers in languages that predated human civilization. But she also felt something else awakening within her, a warmth that seemed to radiate from her very soul, pushing back against the supernatural darkness. "The bond," Father Benedict breathed, watching in amazement as soft light began to emanate from Elena's skin. The soul bond is manifesting physically. Elena looked down at her hands and saw they were glowing with gentle silver radiance, the same color as moonlight on water. The light didn't burn, but it filled her with strength and certainty. This was the power that had allowed her to choose reincarnation, the magic born from love so deep it could reshape reality itself. I can fight them, she realized. Aldric stepped closer, and where their hands touched, the light grew brighter. We can fight them, he corrected. The bond works both ways, beloved. Your strength is mine, and mine is yours. The church door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and ancient stone. 3 figures glided through the opening, their forms shifting between human appearance and something far more predatory. Their eyes burned with cold fire, and their presence made the temperature drop by 20 degrees. Lord Ravencroft, the center figure spoke, in a voice like grinding ice. You have violated the most sacred law of our kind. Prepare to face judgment. Elena stepped forward, the diary still clutched in her hands, silver light streaming from her skin like armor made of starshine. He has violated nothing. We are bonded souls, and that bond predates your laws. The lead vampire's lips curved in a cruel smile. You are a mortal woman playing with forces beyond your understanding. We will destroy you both and cleanse this contaminated village of your influence. But even as he spoke, Elena felt more memories returning, not just of her love for Aldric, but of the magic she had wielded as Mirabelle, the supernatural gifts that had made their bond possible in the first place. She was more than human now. She had always been more than human. The real battle was about to begin. The Vampire Council's hunters moved like liquid shadow, their forms shifting and flowing as they spread out to surround Elena and her companions. But as they approached, something unexpected happened. They began to slow, their movements growing labored, as if they were walking through thick honey. "What is this?" the lead hunter hissed, his cold eyes fixed on the silver light emanating from Elena's skin. Father Benedict stepped forward, holding a medallion that matched the one Elena had discarded. But this one was larger, more ornate, and it pulsed with warm, golden light. "This church has been consecrated against your kind for 4 centuries, he said firmly. "The blessed medallion doesn't just protect individuals, it protects sacred ground." Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward the elderly priest, but her attention remained focused on the hunters. She could see them more clearly now, their true forms visible beneath their human facades. They were ancient things, their faces bearing the weight of countless centuries, their eyes holding the empty coldness of predators who had forgotten what it meant to feel compassion. "You cannot hide behind blessed walls forever," the second hunter said, his voice carrying the accent of old nobility. "We are patient. We can wait decades if necessary." "But we won't have to," the third hunter added, with a smile that revealed fangs like sharpened crystal. "Your protector grows weaker by the hour." Elena's gaze snapped to her mother, who was indeed looking more fragile by the minute. The effort of leaving her sickbed and channeling whatever supernatural strength had sustained her was taking its toll. Margaret swayed on her feet, and Elena rushed to support her. "I can feel it ending," Margaret whispered. "The protection my bloodline has provided. It's fading as I grow weaker." Elena helped her mother sit in one of the front pews, her mind racing. The medallion that had suppressed her memories for 40 years, Father Benedict had said it was blessed to protect against supernatural influence. If her mother's bloodline carried the same protective magic. "The medallion isn't just about blocking memories," she said suddenly. "It's been masking my supernatural signature, hasn't it? That's why the council couldn't find me until now. Father Benedict nodded grimly. Your grandmother was very clever. She knew that Elena the seamstress would live an unremarkable life, noticed by no one of importance. But if Mirabelle's soul began to manifest its true power, I would shine like a beacon to every supernatural creature within 100 miles, Elena finished. Aldric moved closer to her, his own supernatural nature responding to her growing power. The bond is strengthening rapidly now that you've removed the suppression. I can feel our connection deepening with every moment. Elena looked down at her hands, watching the silver light pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. More memories were surfacing, not just emotional recollections now, but practical knowledge. She remembered studying ancient texts with scholars who understood the deeper mysteries of existence. She remembered learning to channel the forces that bound souls together across lifetimes. I wasn't just a nobleman's wife, she said with growing wonder. I was a practitioner of the old arts. That's how I knew I could choose to return. The lead hunter's expression shifted from dismissive arrogance to genuine concern. Impossible. The bloodlines that could wield such power died out centuries ago. Not died out, Margaret said softly. Hidden, scattered, protected until the time was right. She reached into the folds of her worn dress and withdrew something that made all 3 hunters step back in alarm. It was another medallion, but this one was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Made of silver so pure it seemed to glow with inner light, it bore symbols that hurt to look at directly, not because they were evil, but because they contained power, too concentrated for mortal eyes to easily process. The Unity Seal, the second hunter breathed, that was destroyed during the Purge of 1689. Hidden, Margaret corrected, along with the knowledge of how to use it. My family has guarded its secrets for generations, waiting for Mirabelle's return. Elena stared at the medallion in her mother's trembling hands. Even from a distance, she could feel its power calling to something deep within her soul. What does it do? It allows 2 souls to bind permanently across all lifetimes, Father Benedict explained. But using it requires a sacrifice that few are willing to make. The lead hunter snarled, his human facade finally dropping completely to reveal the ancient predator beneath. You speak of legends and fairy tales. Even if that trinket is genuine, the girl lacks the power to activate it. But even as he spoke, the blessed medallion around Father Benedict's neck began to dim. The protective barrier around the church was weakening as Margaret's strength failed, and the hunters were already beginning to move more freely. Elena, Aldric said urgently, whatever you're going to do, it needs to be now. Elena looked around the church that had sheltered her throughout her mortal life, seeing it with new eyes. The stone walls held centuries of prayers and devotion, but she could also sense older powers woven into its foundation, protective wards laid down by those who understood that some truths transcended religious doctrine. I need to understand what I'm choosing, she said, accepting the Unity Seal from her mother's hands. The moment her fingers touched the silver, more memories cascaded through her consciousness. She saw herself as Mirabelle, working late into the night by candlelight, studying texts that spoke of soul magic and the bonds that could survive death itself. She remembered making the original choice to return, remembered the ritual that had sent her soul spinning through centuries to find its way back to Aldric. But she also remembered the warnings, that each time a soul chose rebirth, it grew weaker, until eventually there would be nothing left to reincarnate. This is my last chance, she realized aloud. If I bind our souls with the Unity Seal, we'll be together forever. But if something goes wrong, if I die again, There won't be another return. Aldric's face went pale. Then we don't do it. I won't risk losing you permanently. And I won't risk losing you to the Council's judgment, Elena replied. They'll destroy you for trying to reunite with me. This is the only way we both survive. Margaret struggled to her feet, her face grey with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with determination. There's something else you need to know about the Unity Seal. It doesn't just bind souls, it transforms them. If you use it, you'll become something new, something that exists between mortal and immortal. The hunters had begun to advance again, testing the weakening boundaries of the Church's protection. Elena could feel their hunger, their desire to destroy anything that challenged their understanding of how the world should work. "Will I still be me?" she asked. "You'll be yourself perfected," Margaret said. "All the love, all the strength, all the wisdom of both lifetimes combined into something greater than either alone." Elena looked at Aldric, seeing centuries of loneliness in his eyes, along with desperate hope. She thought of her simple life as a seamstress, the quiet contentment she had known, the safety of the ordinary world. Then she thought of the love that had called her back across centuries, the bond that had made even death feel like a temporary separation. "I choose us," she said, clasping the Unity Seal tightly in both hands. The medallion began to glow with light so bright it filled the entire church, and Elena felt her transformation begin. The moment Elena activated the Unity Seal, the church exploded with silver radiance that sent the vampire hunters reeling backward. But the light didn't stop at the church walls. It spread outward like ripples on a pond, washing over the entire village of Millbrook in waves of pure, transformative energy. Elena felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her physical form. She could sense every living soul in the village. The baker rising early to start his ovens, children dreaming in their beds, elderly couples holding hands in the pre-dawn quiet. But more than that, she could feel the supernatural undercurrents that had always flowed beneath the surface of ordinary life. "The Council Seal," she gasped, as new knowledge flooded her awakening mind. In her hands, the Unity Seal had transformed into something else entirely, a medallion of dark obsidian that pulsed with ancient authority. "This isn't what I thought it was." Margaret smiled weakly from where she sat in the pew. "The Unity Seal was always meant to be a bridge, my dear. It connects you to the real power, the authority to challenge the Vampire Council's laws directly." The three hunters had recovered from their initial shock and were advancing again, but now they moved with caution rather than arrogance. The lead hunter's eyes were fixed on the obsidian medallion with something approaching fear. "Impossible," he snarled. "The Council Seal was destroyed when we overthrew the old regime. No mortal has carried its authority for 3 centuries. Father Benedict stepped forward, his expression grave but triumphant. "Because you never understood what you were fighting. You thought the old vampire lords were your enemies, but they were actually the guardians of balance between our worlds." Elena's vision shifted, and suddenly she could see the hunters not as they appeared now, but as they had been centuries ago. The lead hunter had once been a young nobleman named Marcus, turned vampire against his will and consumed by rage at the life stolen from him. The others bore similar stories, victims who had become predators, their humanity stripped away by trauma and endless years. "You rebelled against the council that maintained peace," she said, understanding flooding through her. "You turned vampirism into something purely predatory instead of what it was meant to be." Aldric moved closer to her, and Elena could feel his memories joining with hers through their strengthening bond. She saw flashes of the old days, vampire lords who protected human settlements, who used their immortality to preserve knowledge and culture across dark ages, who viewed their condition as both gift and responsibility. We grew tired of serving mortals who lived and died in the span of a single season, the second hunter said bitterly. Why should immortal beings bow to creatures who barely exist? Because wisdom isn't measured in years alone, Elena replied, the council seal warming in her hands. It's measured in love, in sacrifice, in the willingness to use power in service of something greater than yourself. The obsidian medallion began to pulse with deeper light, and Elena felt herself connected to something vast and ancient, the collective will of every soul that had ever chosen love over power, sacrifice over selfishness. The true vampire council hadn't been destroyed. It had been waiting, dormant, for someone worthy to reclaim its authority. I challenge your jurisdiction over Lord Ravencroft, Elena declared, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through dimensions unseen. As bearer of the council seal, I invoke the right of trial by testimony. The three hunters recoiled, as if she had struck them, physically. Around the church, the air itself seemed to thicken with supernatural presence as ancient powers stirred to attention. You cannot invoke what you do not understand, the lead hunter protested, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. She understands perfectly, said a new voice from the back of the church. Elena turned to see a figure emerging from shadows that hadn't been there moments before. An elderly woman in elaborate medieval dress, her silver hair braided with jewels that caught and reflected the supernatural light. Lady Cordelia, Aldric breathed, dropping to one knee in automatic deference. I thought you had passed beyond the veil. I have been waiting beyond the veil, the woman replied with gentle authority, waiting for the one who could restore balance to our kind. She approached Elena with steps that made no sound on the stone floor. Child, do you know what you've awakened? Elena looked down at the council seal, feeling its weight both physical and metaphysical. I've called the true council to witness, the original vampire lords who understood that immortality was meant to serve life, not consume it. Lady Cordelia nodded approvingly. And as the first witness, I testify that Lord Aldric Ravencroft has never violated the sacred laws. His love for a mortal soul is precisely what those laws were created to protect. The lead hunter snarled in frustration. The old ways are dead. We make the laws now. You have made rules, Lady Cordelia corrected coldly. But laws, true laws, come from understanding the fundamental nature of existence. You have forgotten that vampirism was never meant to be a curse. It was a gift, given to chosen souls to help them protect and guide humanity through its darkest hours. Elena felt more presences gathering in the church, spirits of the ancient vampire lords called back from whatever realm they had retreated to when the corrupt council seized power. She could see them now as translucent figures filling the pews, their faces bearing the wisdom of ages spent in service rather than predation. Lord Aldric, she said formally, stand and face judgment. Aldric rose, his expression calm despite the magnitude of what was unfolding. I am ready. Elena held up the council seal, feeling its power flow through her like liquid starlight. You are accused of violating vampire law by attempting to reunite with a mortal soul across lifetimes. How do you answer this charge? I answer that love is the highest law, Aldric replied without hesitation. I answer that a bond strong enough to transcend death deserves protection, not persecution. I answer that I would rather face destruction than abandon the other half of my soul. The assembled spirits murmured approval, and Elena felt their collective wisdom adding to her own understanding. The true Vampire Council had never forbidden love. They had celebrated it as the force that kept immortal beings connected to their humanity. "The charge is dismissed," Elena declared, her voice echoing with supernatural authority. "More than that, your love is recognized as an example of what vampirism was meant to preserve, the belief that some bonds are sacred enough to last forever." The three hunters began backing toward the church doors, but they found their way blocked by more spirits materializing from the shadows. The old vampire lords were not merely observing this trial, they were participating in it. "You have usurped authority that was never yours to claim," Lady Cordelia said to the hunters. "You have turned a gift into a curse, protection into predation. It is time for true judgment to be rendered." Elena felt the weight of centuries pressing down on this moment. The corrupt Vampire Council had ruled through fear and might for 300 years, but their reign was about to end. The question was whether it would end through justice or war. Margaret chose that moment to collapse completely, her protective magic finally exhausted. As Elena rushed to catch her mother, she realized that the trial was far from over, and the real test of her newfound authority was just beginning. Elena knelt beside her mother's collapsed form, cradling Margaret's head as her breathing grew shallow and labored. The effort of maintaining the protective magic for so many decades had finally extracted its ultimate price, and Elena could feel her mother's life force ebbing like water through cupped hands. "Mother, stay with me," Elena whispered, but even as she spoke, she knew the end was near. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Elena's face with effort. "The soul mirror," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "Behind the altar, in Father Benedict's hidden chamber. You'll need it to prove." Her words dissolved into a cough that brought flecks of blood to her lips. Father Benedict hurried to the hidden alcove, his movements urgent as the supernatural trial continued around them. The three vampire hunters stood frozen by the ancient spirit's presence, but Elena could sense their growing desperation. Desperate creatures she had learned from Mirabelle's memories were often the most dangerous. "Here," Father Benedict said, returning with an ornate hand mirror, whose silver surface seemed to ripple like water. "The soul mirror has been in our custody since the original council fell. It shows the truth of what souls truly are, stripped of all pretense and deception." Lady Cordelia's spirit form drifted closer, her expression compassionate but firm. "Child, your mother's sacrifice is noble, but the trial cannot wait. The corrupt council grows stronger with each passing moment, and their main force will arrive before dawn." Elena felt torn between her duty to comfort her dying mother and her responsibility to complete the supernatural trial that could save not just Aldric, but potentially restore balance to the vampire world. But as she looked down at Margaret's peaceful face, she saw understanding and encouragement in her mother's eyes. "Go," Margaret whispered. "This is why we protected you. This is why your grandmother gave everything to ensure this moment could happen." Elena kissed her mother's forehead gently, then rose to face the soul mirror with resolve. "How does it work?" "You look into it while stating your claim," Lady Cordelia explained. "The mirror will show not just what you appear to be, but what your soul truly is across all lifetimes. It cannot be deceived or manipulated." Elena lifted the mirror with trembling hands, feeling its supernatural weight. The surface seemed to draw her in, reflecting not just her physical appearance, but something deeper, more fundamental. As she gazed into its depths, she spoke the words that would either vindicate or damn her. "I claim to be Mirabelle Ravencroft, beloved wife of Lord Aldric, reborn through love's power, to reunite with my eternal soulmate. The mirror's surface exploded with visions. Elena saw herself as she was now, weathered, humble, marked by years of simple labor. But then the image shifted, showing her as she had been in her past life, elegant, refined, glowing with the inner light of someone deeply loved. The two images began to overlap and merge, revealing the truth that connected them. But the mirror showed more than just her dual existence. It revealed the magical lineage that had made her rebirth possible, stretching back through generations of women who had understood the deeper mysteries of love and sacrifice. She saw her grandmother Catherine, young and brave, accepting supernatural protection to shield her descendant. She saw Margaret as a child, being taught ancient songs that would help maintain the protective wards. Most importantly, she saw the moment of her original choice. Mirabelle on her deathbed, using the last of her strength to perform a ritual that would send her soul spinning through time until it could find its way back to Aldric. The magic had been powered not by dark forces, but by love so pure it could reshape reality itself. "Witness the truth," Lady Cordelia said to the assembled spirits. "This soul chose to return, powered by a love that honors everything our original council stood for." The lead hunter snarled in frustration. "Parlor tricks and sentimental nonsense. Even if she is who she claims to be, she remains mortal. What threat could one human woman pose to our authority?" Elena lowered the soul mirror, feeling new power coursing through her as the validation of her identity sank deep into her consciousness. The memories weren't just returning now. They were integrating, combining her wisdom as Mirabelle with her strength as Elena to create something entirely new. "I am no longer merely human," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the church's stained glass windows vibrate in their frames. "And I am far from alone." As if summoned by her words, more figures began, materializing throughout the church. But these weren't spirits of long-dead vampire lords. These were living people, descendants of families that had once served the original vampire council, bloodlines that had been waiting for this moment for 3 centuries. Elena recognized some of them from the village. Thomas the blacksmith revealed supernatural strength as he moved to block one of the church's exits. Mary the herb woman's eyes glowed with witchlight as she began weaving protective wards in the air. Even young Peter the stable boy stood transformed, his human appearance falling away to reveal someone far older and more powerful than he had appeared. "The Guardian families," Aldric said with wonder. "I thought they had all been destroyed during the purge." "Hidden," Father Benedict corrected. "Scattered and diminished, but not destroyed. We've been maintaining a network, keeping the old knowledge alive, waiting for the day when the true council could be restored." The second vampire hunter looked around nervously as more guardians revealed themselves. "This is impossible. We eliminated the Guardian bloodlines centuries ago." "You eliminated those who chose to fight openly," Mary the herb woman replied calmly. "Those of us who chose to hide and wait, we endured." Elena felt the presence of each guardian like points of light in her consciousness, their combined strength flowing through the soul mirror and into her awakening powers. This was what Mirabelle's ritual had truly accomplished, not just her own rebirth, but the gathering of forces that could challenge the corrupt council's rule. Margaret stirred in Elena's arms, her eyes opening one final time. "My brave girl," she whispered, "you've brought them all together. The old powers are awakening." Her hand found Elena's, squeezing weakly. "I can go in peace now, knowing you'll build something better than what came before." Elena felt her mother's life force slip away like a gentle sigh, leaving behind only peace and the echo of a job finally completed. But even in her grief, Elena could sense that Margaret's death had released something. The last of the protective magic that had kept her hidden was now free to be channeled into the greater working. The guardians, the true vampire lords, and the bearer of the council seal, Lady Cordelia said with satisfaction. For the first time in 3 centuries, we have the power to restore proper order. The lead hunter's facade finally cracked completely. We will not surrender power to sentiment and outdated ideals. Better to rule through strength than serve through weakness. Elena rose from beside her mother's still form, the soul mirror still glowing in her hands. Around the church, guardians and spirits alike prepared for battle, their combined power making the very air crackle with supernatural energy. Then you leave us no choice but to take that power from you, Elena said quietly. The real war for the vampire world's soul was about to begin. The lead hunter's desperation finally boiled over into action. With a roar that shattered several of the church's ancient windows, he lunged toward Elena, his form shifting into something monstrous and predatory. But before he could reach her, Aldric intercepted him, and the 2 vampires crashed into the altar in an explosion of supernatural force. Elena watched in horror as the man she loved grappled with a creature that had abandoned all pretense of humanity. But even as part of her mind focused on the immediate danger, another part was processing something that didn't quite fit. The hunter's attack had been wild, uncontrolled, the desperate move of someone who had already lost, rather than the calculated strike of a predator confident in his power. "Something's wrong," she said to Lady Cordelia, who was directing the guardian spirits in containing the other 2 hunters. "They're too desperate, too reckless. This doesn't feel like the behavior of creatures who've ruled unchallenged for 3 centuries. Lady Cordelia's translucent form flickered with concern. "What do you mean, child?" Elena lifted the soul mirror again, this time turning it toward the hunters. What she saw reflected back made her blood turn cold. The creatures attacking them weren't the corrupt vampire lords at all. They were foot soldiers, servants created by something far more ancient and malevolent. "These aren't the council members," Elena said, her voice cutting through the sound of battle. "They're puppets. The real power is—" The church door exploded inward again, but this time the force was so great that half the stone wall came with it. Through the smoking rubble stepped a figure that made every supernatural being present, guardian and spirit alike, fall silent with dread. It was a woman, but calling her merely female would be like calling a hurricane merely weather. She stood 7 feet tall, her skin pale as moonlight, and her hair black as the void between stars. When she smiled, Elena could see that her fangs were not ivory like a normal vampire's, but crystalline structures that seemed to bend light in impossible ways. "Seraphina," Lady Cordelia whispered, and Elena had never heard such fear in the spirit's voice. "Hello, Cordelia," the newcomer said, in a voice like silk wrapped around steel. "It's been far too long since we last spoke. I trust you've been keeping well in whatever dreary afterlife you've been haunting." Elena felt the council seal burning against her chest as new knowledge flooded her mind. Seraphina was not just a vampire. She was the first vampire, the original source from which all others had descended. But she had been imprisoned centuries ago by the combined efforts of human and vampire alike, bound in a realm beyond mortal reach. "You're supposed to be sealed away," Elena said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Seraphina's attention turned to her with the intensity of a hunting cat noticing a mouse. "Ah, the little reincarnated wife. How charming. Yes, I was sealed away, trapped in a pocket dimension by a coalition of my own children and their human pets. But you know what they say about the best laid plans. They require constant maintenance. She gestured casually, and the 3 hunters who had been fighting so desperately moments before simply dissolved into shadow, their purpose served. Elena realized with growing horror that the entire confrontation had been orchestrated, a distraction designed to gather all the supernatural forces in one place. The corruption of the Vampire Council, Elena said, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. It wasn't a rebellion by power-hungry vampires. It was you, working through them, weakening the bonds that kept you imprisoned. Very good, Serafina said with mock applause. It took me 3 centuries, but I finally managed to corrupt enough of my descendants to create the chaos necessary for my escape. Every act of vampire cruelty, every abandonment of the old ways, every moment when immortal beings chose selfishness over service, it all fed power back to me. Father Benedict stepped forward, his blessed medallion glowing with desperate light. The seals, they're still intact. You shouldn't be able to manifest in this realm. Serafina's laugh was like breaking crystal. Oh, dear priest, you misunderstand. I'm not fully free yet. This is merely a projection of my power, sent ahead to eliminate the one thing that could prevent my complete return. Her gaze fixed on Elena again, and this time Elena felt the full weight of ancient malice pressing down on her consciousness. You see, little reincarnated soul, your love story isn't quite the romantic tale you believe it to be. Your rebirth, powered by such pure emotion, has created something I never anticipated, a source of power that could actually strengthen the original seals rather than weaken them. Elena felt Aldric moving closer to her, his own supernatural senses recognizing the magnitude of the threat they faced. Around them, the guardian spirits and living protectors prepared for a battle they all knew they couldn't win. Serafina, in her weakened, projected form, was already more powerful than all of them combined. But there's a solution, Serafina continued conversationally. If the reincarnated soul were to be destroyed before it could fully integrate its dual nature, the power would be released in a way that would shatter what remains of my prison. Elena's hand went to the Obsidian Council seal, feeling its weight differently now. That's why you allowed the trial to proceed. You wanted me to claim my full power so you could steal it. Steal is such an ugly word, Serafina said. I prefer to think of it as reclaiming what was always mine by right. After all, without my original gift of immortality to your beloved Aldric, none of this would have been possible. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. She turned to look at Aldric, seeing the truth written in his stricken expression. You received your vampirism from her. Directly? Aldric nodded miserably. In my grief after losing you the first time, I sought out the oldest, most powerful vampire I could find. I begged her to make me strong enough to find a way to bring you back. I had no idea what she truly was, or what accepting her gift would ultimately cost. The bond between you, Serafina explained with cruel delight, exists because he carries a fragment of my essence. Your love has been feeding power to me across lifetimes without your knowledge. And now, when I claim that power directly, it will free me completely. Elena felt the world shifting around her as the true scope of the trap became clear. Everything, her reincarnation, their reunion, even the opposition they had faced from the corrupt council, had been part of an elaborate scheme to gather enough supernatural energy to free the most dangerous being in existence. There is one possibility, Lady Cordelia said desperately. The betrayal blade. If it still exists— Oh, it exists, Serafina interrupted, producing a dagger that seemed to be made of crystallized darkness itself. I've been saving it for this exact moment. You see, the blade has the power to sever any supernatural bond, even one as fundamental as the connection between creator and created. Elena stared at the weapon, her mind racing. If you use that on Aldric, it would cut his connection to you, but it would also destroy our bond completely. Precisely, Seraphina said with satisfaction. He would remain immortal, but powerless. You would revert to being merely human, and I would claim all the energy your love has generated over the centuries. Everyone gets to live. Well, everyone except the thousands who will die when I reclaim my full power. And isn't that a fair trade? Elena looked around the church at the faces of everyone she had come to care about. Father Benedict, with his lifetime of quiet faith, the guardian families who had sacrificed generations to preserve hope, the spirits of the ancient vampire lords who had tried to create something better than mere predation. Most of all, she looked at Aldric, seeing centuries of love and loss written in his immortal features. There has to be another way, she said firmly. Seraphina's smile widened, revealing more of those impossible crystal fangs. Oh, my dear child, there is. You could choose to sacrifice yourself willingly, channeling all your power into strengthening the seals permanently. It would destroy you completely. No heaven, no reincarnation, just absolute annihilation. But it would ensure I remain imprisoned forever. Elena felt the betrayal blade's presence like ice in her veins, and she realized she was facing the ultimate choice between love and duty, between personal happiness and the greater good. The weapon that could save the world would require destroying everything she had fought across lifetimes to reclaim. Elena stared at the betrayal blade in Seraphina's hands, feeling the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. The crystalline dagger seemed to pulse with dark energy, and she could sense its power to sever even the strongest supernatural bonds. Around her, the church had grown silent except for the whisper of wind through the shattered windows. I need time to think, Elena said, buying precious moments to find another solution. Seraphina's laugh held no warmth. Time? My dear child, time is precisely what we lack. My projection grows stronger with each passing moment, and once I achieve full manifestation, your choices become considerably more limited. Father Benedict stepped forward, his aged face set with determination. There may be another way. The Unity Chalice. It was designed for exactly this sort of impossible choice. Elena turned to the priest, hope flickering in her chest. What Unity Chalice? Hidden beneath the altar for 4 centuries, Father Benedict said, moving toward the ancient stone structure. Your grandmother Catherine wasn't just a servant in the Ravencroft household. She was a guardian of one of the most powerful artifacts ever created. Seraphina's expression shifted from amusement to genuine concern. That relic was destroyed. I made certain of it. Hidden, Father Benedict corrected, pressing a sequence of stones in the altar's base. A section of the ancient stonework slid aside, revealing a goblet that seemed to be carved from a single piece of starlight-infused crystal. Not destroyed. Elena felt her breath catch as she looked at the Unity Chalice. Even from a distance, she could sense its immense power. Not the dark, consuming energy of Seraphina's magic, but something pure and transformative, like concentrated love given physical form. The chalice allows 2 souls to bind permanently across all lifetimes, Father Benedict explained, lifting the artifact with reverent care. But more than that, it can redistribute power between bonded souls, balancing their supernatural abilities until they become something new. Aldric moved closer to Elena, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. If we both drink from it, we could share the burden of containing Seraphina's essence. Instead of one mortal soul trying to channel immortal power, two souls perfectly balanced between mortal and immortal could create a binding strong enough to reinforce the prison seals, Elena finished. But what would that cost us? Lady Cordelia's spirit form flickered with new hope. It would transform you both into something unprecedented. Guardians who exist between worlds, powerful enough to maintain the barriers that keep entities like Seraphina contained. Seraphina snarled, her projection beginning to solidify as her anger fed it more power. Romantic nonsense! Even if such a transformation were possible, you would sacrifice your humanity entirely. You would become eternal watchmen, forever separated from the mortal world you seek to protect. Elena felt the truth in those words like a physical blow. Using the unity chalice would mean giving up any hope of a normal life, of growing old together in peaceful contentment. They would become something beyond human understanding, guardians cursed to eternal vigilance. But as she looked around the church at the faces of those depending on her, Father Benedict, with his lifetime of faith, the guardian families who had hidden for centuries waiting for this moment, even the spirits of the ancient vampire lords who had tried to create something better, Elena realized that some choices transcended personal desires. "There's something else," Margaret's voice whispered in Eleanor's memory. She could almost see her mother's spirit standing beside her now, offering comfort in this moment of ultimate decision. The chalice doesn't just transform the drinkers, it allows them to choose their level of sacrifice. Elena closed her eyes, reaching deep into the memories that were still integrating from both lifetimes. As Mirabelle, she had studied the ancient texts that spoke of the unity chalice's true properties. The artifact didn't demand everything from those who used it. It gave them the power to decide how much they were willing to sacrifice. "We could choose partial transformation," she said aloud, opening her eyes to meet Aldric's gaze. "Enough power to reinforce the seals permanently, but not so much that we lose our essential humanity." Seraphina's projection grew more solid, her features sharpening with desperate fury. "You understand nothing about the forces you're tampering with. The partial transformation has never been successfully achieved. The last souls who attempted it were torn apart by the conflicting energies." "But they didn't have what we have," Aldric said quietly, taking Elena's hand. "They weren't bonded souls who had already chosen each other across lifetimes. Their love was strong, but it wasn't tested by death and rebirth." Father Benedict lifted the unity chalice higher, its crystal surface beginning to glow with inner light. "The choice must be made soon. I can feel the seals weakening as Seraphina's projection draws more power from our realm." Elena looked at the chalice, then at the betrayal blade still clutched in Seraphina's hands, weighing her options. The blade offered certainty. It would definitely stop Seraphina, but at the cost of everything she and Aldric had fought to reclaim. The chalice offered hope, but with no guarantee of success. Around them, the guardian families began to glow with their own supernatural light, lending their strength to whatever decision Elena would make. Thomas the blacksmith stepped forward, his weathered hands emanating silver radiance. "We've waited 3 centuries for this moment," he said simply. "Whatever you choose, we stand with you." Mary the herb woman nodded agreement. "Our bloodlines have preserved the ancient knowledge for exactly this purpose. Use our power however you need." Elena felt their combined strength flowing through the air like a warm current, adding to the energy already crackling between her and Aldric. This wasn't just about their love anymore. It was about the hopes and sacrifices of everyone who had believed that love could triumph over darkness. "I have a better idea," Elena said suddenly, inspiration striking like lightning. What if we don't choose between the blade and the chalice? What if we use them together? Seraphina's eyes widened with alarm. That's impossible. The energies are completely incompatible. Not incompatible, Elena corrected, her mind racing as the plan formed. Complementary. The betrayal blade severs bonds. But what if we used it to cut Seraphina's connection to this realm entirely? Then we use the unity chalice to create new bonds, not just between Aldric and me, but between all the guardians present. A network of souls powerful enough to maintain the seals forever. Lady Cordelia's spirit form blazed brighter. A collective guardian consciousness, it's theoretically possible, but the coordination required would be provided by two souls who are already perfectly synchronized, Aldric finished, understanding Elena's plan completely. We become the focal point for a guardian network that spans both the living and the dead. Father Benedict looked between them with growing excitement. The guardians have been preparing for this possibility for generations. Each bloodline carries a piece of the knowledge needed to make it work. Elena felt the rightness of the plan settling into her bones. It wasn't just about personal sacrifice anymore. It was about transformation, about creating something new and beautiful from the chaos Seraphina had wrought. But we have to move quickly, Elena said, seeing Seraphina's projection continuing to solidify. She's drawing enough power to break through completely. Seraphina raised the betrayal blade threateningly. I will not allow you to steal what is rightfully mine. The power your love has generated belongs to me by right of creation. Then come and take it, Elena challenged, accepting the unity chalice from Father Benedict's hands. The crystal felt warm against her palms, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Aldric moved to stand beside her, his own hands covering hers on the chalice's stem. Around them, the guardian families formed a circle, their combined power creating a barrier of light that held Seraphina's projection at bay. But Elena could see the barrier weakening under the ancient vampire's assault. Together? Aldric asked, his eyes holding all the love of both lifetimes. Together, Elena confirmed. But even as they lifted the unity chalice toward their lips, Elena knew that Seraphina wouldn't allow them to complete the ritual without a fight. The real battle, not just for their love, but for the fate of both mortal and immortal worlds, was about to begin. The question was whether their bond would prove strong enough to withstand the fury of the first vampire, or whether their love story would end in tragedy after all. Elena closed her eyes and prepared to find out. The moment Elena and Aldric's lips touched the unity chalice, Seraphina's fury exploded across the church. Her projection solidified completely as she lunged toward them, the betrayal blade gleaming with dark purpose. But the guardian families were ready. Their combined barrier of light flared brighter, holding the ancient vampire back just long enough for the chalice's power to begin its work. Elena felt the first wave of transformation wash through her body like liquid starlight. Every cell sang with new energy as mortal and immortal forces began to balance within her soul. Beside her, Aldric gasped as his own vampiric nature shifted, becoming something cleaner, more purposeful than the predatory hunger that had sustained him for centuries. "Now!" Elena shouted to Father Benedict, who had retrieved something from the hidden chamber, a circlet of dark metal that pulsed with ominous energy. The priest understood immediately. This was Aldric's transformation crown, the artifact that could amplify his alpha vampire powers to their absolute maximum. But using it would come at a terrible cost. The crown threatened to consume whatever humanity remained in its wearer, turning them into pure supernatural force. Seraphina broke through the guardian barrier in an explosion of shadow and fury, her true form finally revealed. She towered above them all, her skin crackling with energy, stolen from centuries of vampire corruption, her eyes burning with the light of dying stars. "You cannot stop what has already begun," she snarled, raising the betrayal blade above Elena and Aldric, who were still locked together around the unity chalice. But Aldric was faster. With supernatural speed, he broke away from Elena just long enough to seize the transformation crown from Father Benedict's hands and place it on his head. The effect was immediate and terrifying. His already considerable power exploded outward, filling the church with energy that made the ancient stones groan in protest. "Aldric, no!" Elena cried, seeing what the crown was doing to him. His features were sharpening, becoming more predatory, as the artifact fed on his vampiric nature and amplified it beyond safe limits. "I won't let her hurt you," Aldric said, his voice now carrying harmonics that spoke of power barely contained. "Not again. Not ever again." He launched himself at Seraphina, and the two immortals crashed together with force that shattered the remaining windows. Elena watched in horror as they grappled, supernatural strength against ancient malice, while the transformation crown slowly consumed more of Aldric's humanity with each passing second. Around them, the guardian families poured their own power into the unity chalice, trying to complete the ritual even as the battle raged. Elena could feel their strength flowing into her, adding to the transformation that was still underway. She was becoming something new, not fully mortal, not fully immortal, but something that existed in perfect balance between the two states. Thomas the blacksmith cried out as one of Seraphina's wild attacks sent him crashing into the altar. Elena saw blood, too much blood, pooling beneath his still form. The ancient vampire's fury was claiming innocent lives, and Elena knew she couldn't let the battle continue. "Mother," Elena whispered, calling on Margaret's spirit for guidance. "Show me what to do." Margaret's voice seemed to whisper in her ear, carrying wisdom born from decades of sacrifice. "The crown is not a curse, my daughter. It's an amplifier. It becomes what its wearer truly is. If Aldric's nature is love rather than predation, the crown will reflect that truth." Elena understood. The transformation crown was responding to Aldric's vampiric instincts, but those instincts had been shaped by centuries of grief and loneliness. If she could reach the core of who he truly was, the man who had loved her enough to seek immortality just for the chance to find her again, the crown would transform accordingly. Still holding the unity chalice, Elena reached out with her newfound power, touching Aldric's mind through their strengthening soul bond. What she found there broke her heart and healed it simultaneously. 300 years of loss and longing, but underneath it all, an unshakable foundation of love that had never wavered. "Remember," she called to him, her voice carrying across the chaos of battle. "Remember our wedding day. Remember the way you held me when I was dying. Remember that you chose immortality not for power, but for love." The transformation. Crown's energy shifted, its dark emanations becoming something else entirely. Instead of feeding on predatory instincts, it began amplifying Aldric's capacity for protection, for sacrifice, for the kind of love that could transcend death itself. Seraphina stumbled back in surprise as Aldric's attacks changed from predatory strikes to defensive maneuvers designed to shield Elena and the Guardians. The ancient vampire's confidence flickered for the first time as she realized her opponent was no longer fighting like a monster. He was fighting like a man defending everything he held dear. "Impossible," Seraphina hissed. "The crown transforms vampires into apex predators. It cannot create protectors. It creates what its wearer truly is, Elena replied, her own transformation nearing completion. She could feel the Unity Chalice's power spreading through her, connecting her not just to Aldric, but to every guardian soul present, living and dead. Elena raised the chalice high, its crystal surface now blazing with light that drove back the shadows Seraphina had brought with her. And we are protectors. We always have been. The final phase of their transformation began, and Elena knew that whatever happened next would determine the fate of both worlds. Elena felt the Unity Chalice's power reach its crescendo, transforming her into something that existed perfectly between mortal and immortal. Around her, the guardian family's combined strength flowed like rivers of light, creating a network of souls that spanned centuries of sacrifice and hope. But it was the final artifact that would determine their victory or defeat. From the rubble of the destroyed altar, Father Benedict retrieved a stone tablet covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as Elena looked at them. The prophecy stone, the original source of all the predictions about soul bonds and reincarnation. The prophecy was never about destruction, Father Benedict called out over the sounds of battle. It was about redemption. Elena read the ancient words as her transformed consciousness translated them effortlessly. The corrupt vampire council had misunderstood everything. Love didn't destroy immortal darkness, it redeemed it, transforming predatory nature into protective purpose. Seraphina's eyes widened with alarm as she realized what was happening. No, the prophecy speaks of vampire extinction, the end of our kind. The end of vampirism as mindless predation, Elena corrected, her voice now carrying the harmonics of the entire Guardian network. But not the end of those who choose to use their gifts in service of life rather than death. She channeled the Unity Chalice's power through herself and into Aldric, who was still grappling with the ancient vampire. The transformation crown responded to the infusion of purified energy, its amplification effects becoming something beautiful rather than monstrous. Aldric's vampiric strength didn't diminish. It evolved, becoming the power to heal rather than harm, to protect rather than prey. The change rippled outward from Aldric to every vampire touched by his bloodline, including Seraphina herself. Elena watched in amazement as the ancient vampire's crystalline fangs began to lose their predatory edge, her overwhelming malice warring with something she had forgotten existed within her, the capacity for love that had made her first creation possible. "What are you doing to me?" Seraphina demanded, her towering form flickering between monstrous and merely immortal. "Giving you back what you lost," Elena replied. "The ability to choose who you want to be rather than being trapped by what you've become." Elena performed the Unity Chalice ritual with complete understanding now, binding not just her soul to Aldric's, but creating a network that connected every guardian present, living, dead, and newly transformed. She felt their combined power flowing through the prophecy stone, rewriting the fundamental nature of vampirism itself. Seraphina's rage crumbled as memories flooded back, not of conquest and corruption, but of her original purpose. She had become the first vampire, not through malice, but through love for humanity, accepting immortality to serve as an eternal guardian. Centuries of isolation and betrayal had twisted that noble intent into something dark and hungry. "I remember," Seraphina whispered, her massive form shrinking back to human proportions as her true nature reasserted itself. "I remember why I chose this existence." Elena stepped forward, still glowing with the Unity Chalice's power, extending her hand to the ancient vampire. "Then choose again. Help us build something better than what came before." The betrayal blade fell from Seraphina's trembling fingers, its purpose inverted. Instead of severing bonds, it now cut away the corruption that had accumulated over centuries, leaving behind the pure intention that had motivated the first vampire's transformation. Aldric removed the transformation crown, no longer needing its amplification now that his nature had been permanently changed. The crown itself crumbled to dust, its aggressive energies purified and integrated into the greater working Elena had orchestrated. Around them, the church blazed with light as the Guardian network established itself permanently. Elena could feel each connection: Father Benedict's unwavering faith, the Guardian family's generational sacrifice, the spirits of the ancient vampire lords who had tried to maintain balance, and now Seraphina's restored nobility. "The seals on your prison are no longer necessary," Elena said to Seraphina. "You're free to choose your path, but you're no longer capable of choosing corruption." Seraphina knelt among the debris of the church, tears streaming down her face as she remembered what it felt like to love without consuming, to protect without dominating. "What have I become? What have I done?" "You've become what you were always meant to be," Elena replied gently. "And now you have eternity to make amends for the centuries when you forgot." The Unity Chalice's light began to fade as the ritual reached completion, but the bonds it had created remained strong and permanent. Elena felt Aldric's presence in her consciousness, not as an intrusion, but as a completion. Two souls finally united in perfect harmony. More than that, she felt the Guardian network stretching across the world, touching every supernatural being and offering them the same choice Seraphina had been given: evolution rather than extinction, redemption rather than destruction. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but not through the ending the corrupt council had feared. Instead of destroying the darkness, love had transformed it into something beautiful and new. Elena looked around the ruined church, seeing not destruction, but possibility. They had won, but more importantly, they had created something that would endure long after their own story had become legend. The real work of healing the world was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything. Elena stood in the restored cemetery, watching Aldric tend the flowers they had planted around Mirabelle's grave. The headstone remained, but it no longer marked an ending. It celebrated a love that had transcended death itself. The village of Millbrook had been transformed as much as its supernatural guardians. Where once there had been fear of the unknown, now there was acceptance of the miraculous. The Guardian families no longer needed to hide their true nature, and the reformed vampires who had chosen redemption over predation walked openly among mortals who understood they were protectors rather than predators. Elena fingered the new dawn pendant that hung around her neck, a symbol of the renewed vampire covenant they had established. Forged from the remains of all the artifacts that had played a role in their victory, it represented the balance between immortal power and human compassion that now governed supernatural society. "She would have loved seeing this," Aldric said softly, placing a fresh rose on the grave that bore both Mirabelle's name and Elena's. The inscription now read, "Here lies love eternal. Mirabelle Ravencroft, 1625-1647. Reborn as Elena Aldridge, 1968-2025, united forever." Elena smiled, feeling the truth in his words through their permanent soul bond. She was both women now, Elena's practical wisdom combined with Mirabelle's noble grace, creating someone new while honoring both lifetimes. "I think she's still here, in a way. Every time we choose love over fear, every time we use our power to protect rather than control." The Guardian network hummed quietly in the background of her consciousness, connecting her to supernatural beings across the world who had chosen transformation over destruction. Some were reformed vampires, learning to use their immortality in service of life. Others were witches, shapeshifters, and other supernatural beings who had emerged from hiding to help build a better world. Father Benedict approached through the cemetery gates, moving more slowly now, but with the satisfied bearing of a man whose life's work had been completed. "The Council of Balance is ready to convene," he said, referring to the formal organization they had established to oversee supernatural affairs. "Representatives from 12 countries have confirmed their attendance." Elena nodded. The Council of Balance was perhaps their greatest achievement, a democratic institution where supernatural beings and humans worked together to address the challenges of their newly interconnected world. Serafina served as its first chair, her centuries of experience balanced by the wisdom she had regained through redemption. "How is she adapting to her new role?" Aldric asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Better than expected," Father Benedict replied. "Having a purpose again, a noble purpose, seems to have healed much of the damage her isolation caused. She speaks often of making amends, of using her remaining eternity to repair what she broke." Elena felt a warm glow of satisfaction through the Guardian network. Serafina's transformation had rippled outward, inspiring other ancient beings to examine their own choices and seek redemption where needed. The world was still healing from centuries of supernatural conflict, but progress was steady and hopeful. And the others? The vampire bloodlines that chose not to transform? Father Benedict's expression grew sad but resigned. "They've retreated to the deep places of the world, clinging to their predatory nature. We monitor them, but we don't hunt them. As you taught us, even darkness deserves the chance to choose light eventually." Elena's hand found Aldric's, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. Through their bond, she could feel his pride in what they had accomplished together, but also his profound contentment in their simple domestic happiness. They had their grand destiny, but they also had quiet evenings reading by the fire, walks through the village market, and the 1,000 small joys of a shared life. "I've been thinking about children," Elena said suddenly, voicing a hope that had been growing in her heart for months. Aldric's eyes lit up with wonder. "Is that possible, given our transformed nature?" Serafina believes so. The Unity Chalice didn't just balance our supernatural aspects, it ensured we retained the full spectrum of human experience, including the ability to create new life. Elena smiled at his expression of stunned joy. Immortal children born from love rather than bite or curse. The first of a truly new generation. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the village they protected. Elena's enhanced senses picked up the sounds of ordinary life. Children playing in the streets, families gathering for dinner, lovers walking hand in hand through lamplight. It was the symphony of peace they had fought to preserve. "Do you ever regret it?" Aldric asked quietly. "Giving up the chance at a normal human life for this eternal responsibility?" Elena considered the question seriously, as she always did. "I regret the pain we couldn't prevent, the people we lost along the way. But this?" She gestured to encompass not just the cemetery, but the entire transformed world around them. "This feels like what we were always meant to build together." Through the Guardian network, she could sense their allies preparing for sleep across the world. Reformed vampires settling into meditation rather than hunting. Witches tending gardens that grew both mundane and magical herbs. Shapeshifters curling up with their human families who now knew their true nature. As they walked home through the village, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a simple seamstress drawn to a mysterious grave, to a woman who had helped reshape the fundamental nature of supernatural existence, the transformation still sometimes felt surreal. But when she looked at Aldric's face in the lamplight, seeing centuries of loneliness replaced by contentment and purpose, she knew every sacrifice had been worthwhile. They had proven that love could indeed conquer death, not by defeating it, but by transforming it into something beautiful and eternal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the supernatural and human worlds continued learning to coexist. But tonight, Elena was simply a woman walking home with the man she loved, their bond strong enough to last forever, and their purpose clear enough to guide them through whatever came next. Their love story had become legend, but more importantly, it had become hope. Proof that even the darkest night could be transformed by dawn.